Yo, what's up? Welcome to our Instagram Live. I'm Al Karim. This is a coffee and a cocktail bar, and I'm excited to have Mike Payne here.
What's up?
What's up, man? How you doing?
I feel great to be here.
Good, man. Glad you did this last minute. Came in.
For sure.
Mike was a filler for me because Brett got sick. So shout out to our daily Brett, owner of Business and Pleasure
Get him
Neighbor.
another
And
time.
yeah, a lot of local businesses. But yeah, I'm stoked you're here, man. You're an Inglewood kind of resident. Mike, tell us a bit about your story, how you ended up in Calgary and kind of what brought you to the city.
Yeah, well, I've been all over the place. I was originally from Ontario and lived in a few different communities in Ontario. And then my dad's job just took us into the US. So I lived in a couple places in the US, specifically Indiana and Michigan. So that's where all my sports allegiances come from, is that era of my life. And then eventually we moved back to Saskatchewan, lived in Saskatoon. That's where I went to university, studied business, decided I wanted to get into marketing. And then in 2017, I decided to move to Calgary, got married, settled down, launched my agency, and the rest is kind of history. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, sweet, man. So Mike owns a real awesome agency in Calgary called Arcade. And the reason why I wanted Mike here is because obviously we're talking about middle housing, community, culture. Mike, you've obviously lived in a bunch of different communities. So tell us about the housing forums kind of you grew up in and what that was like for you. And
yeah, for sure. So today I live in a townhome in Altadore and I absolutely love it. And but that's very different than how I grew up when we lived in Ontario, and then even when we moved into the US and back to Saskatoon. It was always more of the suburb kind of environment. And it was fun. Like, I didn't really know anything different when I was a kid. There was no fences in the backyard. So you'd go and play with all your friends and like take over everyone's backyards and their playgrounds and all that kind of stuff. But everything felt far. So we were always in the car a lot. Even when I was going to elementary school, one of the negative memories I have of that was how much time I spent on the bus.
yeah, fair.
And one of the communities we lived in when we first moved back to Canada, I remember that I would be on the bus. I would be one of the first ones on the bus in the morning at like 7:15 or something like that. And we wouldn't get to school until like 8:30, 8:45. And then I'd be the last one off the bus at the end of the day. So I'd spend another hour 15 on the bus after school before I got home. And then it was dinner time and then bedtime, you know?
Yeah.
So that's one thing I definitely remember. And then just as I grew up, as I went to university, as I moved out, I just found myself more attracted to more denser communities and even just being closer to the action, closer to whether it's downtown or even kind of like fringe areas of downtown where there's coffee shops and restaurants and you can meet people like you on the street that have similar interests and that kind of thing. So I spend a lot of time in apartments through university. I shared an apartment with my brother and then with some of my friends, and then did some basement suites, moved out on my own, had my own basement suite, which was pretty lit.
Dope. Yeah.
And then
Shout out to the basement suite.
Exactly. And then when I got married, again, we lived in Victoria Park first in Calgary in the Colors building. It was close to everything and we loved it. And then we moved to Inglewood, which is also where our agency's office is.
Yep.
And then the only reason we moved out of Inglewood was because we needed more space because we were having our second kid. So
I think I remember you wanted to stay in Inglewood.
I did.
You couldn't find an affordable option for you to rent for a family in Inglewood.
One, we couldn't find either like an affordable house.
Yeah.
But also we couldn't find a house really. Like it just seemed to me, and I still feel this, like once you're in a community like Inglewood, especially in a house or even a townhome or something like that, people don't want to leave. So it was one, anything that was available was expensive, but then two, not much was available outside of the apartment kind of situation that we were in.
Yeah,
so.
fair. You know, it's funny you talk about the suburbs. I talk a lot about this in Calgary. Like, I'm born and raised here. I've never lived anywhere else. I spent the majority of my life in suburbs. But for a short period of time, I was born in kind of Dover, the Forest Lawn area. And then we moved into Temple. It was an established community. And like, for some reason, like there's 3 years that I lived there, like kindergarten to grade 3. It was like the best vivid memories I have in my life. Cause like, I remember the big trees. I remember playing out in the yard. All the cars had so we had alleys. So all the cars technically were in the alleys, not on the streets. And so our parents weren't as concerned about us kind of like navigating the neighborhood. And then we moved to like a suburb community, Coral Springs, still a great community, but I remember it not feeling the same. And it's funny, as I go back, I'm like, I don't know why it didn't feel the same for me, but like we all had private backyards. They were massive, but everything had a double car garage. And I think about this now, like there's no sidewalks in a lot of those communities. Like
That's true.
it's so trippy now. I'm like, holy shit. So like everything was built for the car. There's actually no sidewalks in any of those bulb out cul-de-sacs. You're like, why is that? And so it's funny when you share your experience about like what it was like in a suburb, because I had that same experience. I used to walk to school. I remember one time I was like out to like 8:39. My parents called the police because they were like, he's gone. And this is like great. I was in grade 3. We were playing road hockey like down the block.
So much road hockey.
Yeah, so much road hockey. Like, and mind you, like I got hit by a car on a bike because but that was the best thing for me. My parents like let me actually like navigate the neighborhood and felt comfortable about that. And I felt like, you know, that's the experience that I think like established neighborhoods provide. And so I just wanted to share that context. But getting back to Inglewood, I remember when we first met, you were looking for a townhome. You'd asked me if we had anything. At the time, we didn't have anything that would fit for you. And then I said, Mike, would you ever consider moving to like, you know, the south side? And you're like, oh, no, that's not inner city. I remember you were saying like, I like to be close.
I wanted to be in Hillhurst first. I was like, at least that's by Kensington. It's close to the river.
Yeah, you wanted to walk.
Right across the bridge from downtown.
Yeah. And so maybe like obviously 2 kids now, like, are you guys a single car household? I can't remember.
We got 2 cars.
2 cars now. Okay. Yeah. So like what drives you to want to be in those communities? Like you talk about the walkableness of them. Obviously you're still a 2-car family, but like, are you excited about your kids being able to kind of walk to school? Why do you like being in these neighborhoods?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the reasons change as you get older and as there's different dynamics. So obviously when we had kids, our rationale or the requirements or criteria we were looking for definitely evolved. When we moved to Altadore, we were a little bit hesitant, like you said, like it did feel far compared to what we were used to. But as soon as we got there, man, it felt so good. And like walkability is one thing, your ability to like walk 3 blocks and be at a park or a cafe or like meet a family that's like you or going to the same school as your kids. And we did also want to make sure that their school was nearby. So we were picking between a couple options, and our daughter's going to go to kindergarten at a school 5 minutes away.
Amazing.
Which feels awesome. You know, our office is the farthest thing that we drive to now because we're in Inglewood, but everything else we do is close. And that's awesome. And I also just want to feel, I think that there's like, this might not be the right word, but there's some more culture in the area that we grow up in. And I want my kids to be able to see different people from different walks of life and not feel like they're in a place where everyone looks the same and acts the same and thinks the same as them. Yeah. Whether that's politically or sociologically or whatever. So I find that's more prevalent the closer you get to the middle of the city. Yeah. Personally, in my experience. Whereas when you're in the suburbs, all the houses kind of look the same. All the streets kind of look the same. Each of them have the kind of the same proportion of trees. You know, it's just it all kind of becomes this like duplication of itself. You know,
it's interesting you say that though, because like you and I have talked about this, like a lot of people that are rooted in these communities have been there for 20 to 30 years are actually terrified of the change, you know, feel like they're getting displaced, feel like no one cares about their needs. So like as someone who, I hope you don't mind me saying, like obviously renting a townhome within these communities, how do you respond to that change? Like folks who are like, hey man, like I just want my single family home. Don't park your cars on the street. Does that bother you? Like, have you really, what does that feel like for you as someone who is in these communities and, you know, also trying to be respectful of folks who have been there for a long time?
Right. I gotta say, I don't fully understand it.
Okay.
Like I remember how it felt living in the suburbs, and it wasn't bad. Like you said, there's tons of road hockey. You played with lots of kids. It was safe. But Altadore is safe too. You know, like when we lived downtown, we had to lock everything up. And even I had my road bike in like an interior locked room in the apartment building and it still got stolen. Yeah. But then when we moved to Altadore, like we were able to still like leave our stroller on the front deck or, you know, leave stuff out and it's totally fine. And that's kind of things I remember about the suburbs too. It was quiet and safe, which is nice. But I also just don't really understand people getting upset about like someone parking in front of their house or some of those complaints you start to get when people get worried about other kinds of people coming into their neighborhood or even like greater density or other types of homes. So it's hard for me to even respond to it because I don't really understand the line of thinking personally.
Sure. And so like, obviously you live in a little bit more of a dense kind of established neighborhood, like community within your community. And so talk to me about being close to your neighbors, and like, you don't have your own backyard. Obviously I know that.
Yeah. It's like a shared courtyard.
Yeah. Your garbage is like combined. And so like, are you building relationships? Like, do you feel good about not only the community of Altadore at large, but also like the small community that's developed within your development?
100%. We walk way more than we ever have in the area, but also we know our neighbors, and that's really nice. And to be fair, like, we knew our neighbors when we lived in the suburbs when we were younger, but I just think that when you move into a place where there is shared space, I think already in order to live there and to like embrace that, you have to believe in it. You have to believe, or even be like looking for the opportunity to rub shoulders with people. And I think often the way that single homes, and especially in the suburbs, are built, it's like, this is my space, and I'll engage with you if we meet each other on the curb. But other than that, like, I'm looking for privacy. So I've never really craved that.
Yeah.
Obviously, if I want privacy, I'll go inside.
Yeah.
But when I'm outside, when I'm out there with my kids, like, I want them to make friends. I want to know who lives in the area. I want to know what they're about, what their experience is. I want to learn from them. I want to know why they're voting for so-and-so rather than the person on the other side of me. Yeah. And there's a lot of differences of opinion, which I think just sharpens us. It makes us better.
No, it's cool, man. I like that perspective. So maybe let's jump into kind of this whole idea about renter versus owner. Obviously you felt comfortable renting. I think you and I have talked, and you have aspirations of ownership, but you've shared like, Al, I don't know what that looks like anymore. Like, prices continue to climb. There's concerns about where you could own. Yeah. I think you could own in the further away from the city, but that's maybe not necessarily what you want. Maybe talk to me about where your head's at from that perspective.
Yeah. To be straight up, I think where my head's at, and where my wife and I have thought for a long time, is just more this idea of delayed gratification when it comes to ownership. We haven't ever felt a rush towards it, and we've loved the flexibility of not being locked into a mortgage or even a home in a neighborhood that we don't know if we're like long-term committed to. We like the ability, if we wanted to move, we could, even if it was a temporary move, like to another country or something like that, for the experience or something. But also, we're business owners. So right now, the last 5 years, especially, we've really had the perspective that our business is our biggest investment, and also one of the investments that can have the best outcome, the most lucrative outcome if we do things right. And that's the way it's going. And so I feel like owning would be really exciting, but I've never had any interest in getting a starter home and then selling it and then buying a better one and then selling it and then buying a better one. Where our heads have been at is much more like, okay, let's really put everything we got into the most high potential investment we have, which is our business. Have the flexibility, grow with our family. And then when we're ready, which could be, in the next 3 to 5 years, potentially, either buy exactly the home we want to live in for the rest of our lives, or build the kind of home we want to live in for the rest of our lives. And I would love to do that cash if I could, even,
of course. You touched on something really cool for me, and this is why I've always loved your agency, because I feel like you guys are kind of at the cusp of everything. And so when you talk about where your investment should be, what I hear you saying to me is like, my money's better with me than it is necessarily in owning a home. And if I could rent where I want to be, that's more important to me. And so I love this idea of like how, back in the day, it's like, get a home, own it. That's your investment. And then, like you said, graduate and get to a new community. Right. It sounds like that's changing, not only for you as an owner, but tell me about your staff, like the people who work in your office. Are you seeing that mentality being similar? Like, I know a lot of those folks are younger, in the millennial kind of demographic. What are you hearing around your office? Yeah,
I mean, I don't have a lot of direct conversations with our team about that kind of stuff, but I think what I see is a lot of not necessarily same point of view or like worldview, but similarities in and like trends. And what I see in that is this desire for flexibility, to be able to work remotely sometimes when they want to work at the office sometimes, even to be able to travel and like see other parts of the world, and if their career lends them that flexibility, that seems to be really exciting. And my perception is that similar, or has some sort of effect on the way they think about owning property as well. If it feels advantageous to them, they have the ability to do it. They have the means to do it. But if unless it does, it seems like they don't feel the pressure to do it. And we even have not just millennials on staff, but we got people Gen Z, And for some of them, it seems almost like the last thing on their mind
Totally.
at this stage. Like maybe I'll never own a home, but do I even want to, you know?
Totally.
So there's a lot of questions being asked.
Yeah, and it's funny. I remember being in your office and having a conversation with your whole team. I felt like they're calling bullshit on me when I was like, "Yo, middle's for everyone." They're like, "Fuck that!" Like, how's middle for me? I was like, "Oh
Right.
shit, they're right." Like, how is middle for them? And so, like, you and I have had this conversation, and then this is something that is really important to me. Is like, one, could I help Mike figure out what it takes to go through middle housing? And so, like, for me, part of the change here that we can inspire is like, rather than Mike building or buying a $1.5 million townhome when he's ready, or a single, or whatever it's going to cost at that time, could we get Mike to go into a middle housing development, get the housing that you need for you and your family, but also provide for folks at your office, hopefully with an incentive to create an affordable requirement. And so this is the thing I think a lot of people miss, and you and I have talked about, and I wanted to share, is like, we're trying to deliver, you know, at grade suites, basement suites that are in that $1,000 to $1,300. And so for me, like, I know you and I have talked about this. You were like, I'd love to have a revenue generating income and have a smaller place because it still provides the affordability. So maybe share with me, like, what about that creates that excitement for you specifically? Like, do you feel like you're having to give something up by not having, you know, the single family home, or like, again, you just said, I'm more interested in the investment to live a more flexible lifestyle?
Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert in it, but I think the things that intrigue me are, one, the affordability side of things, knowing that we do have a housing crisis and that things are getting more expensive and it's getting harder for everybody. And then, of course, as a business owner and just entrepreneur in general, I'm very curious about the long-term revenue opportunity of middle housing development. Also, my family, together, we have a few units in Canmore that are short-term vacation rentals. And that's been a really exciting, fun project for us. And it's also just kind of brought my perspective out of just marketing and agency into like other kinds of opportunities that I can be thinking about now for the future. And it's gone really well. And so I think that's kind of added more intrigue to me for other types of similar real estate revenue generating opportunities like middle housing. So I know a little bit more about the short-term vacation rental side of things, but what I'm really curious about at this point, in addition to that, is more of that like long-term affordable opportunity that comes with developing something like that. And then for us personally, the reason I'm interested in building is because I love the idea of the customizability. Like I can make it ours, you know, we can put our touch on it and make it feel really good and even have the layout fit us, but we've never needed a lot of space. Yeah. And we've even been watching a lot of those kind of like real estate reality shows on Netflix and stuff like that. Yeah. Where there's all these like crazy huge homes in LA and New York and places like that that are like 5,000, 7,000 square feet. And I don't even feel good about that. You know, like that does not appeal to me in any way. Totally. I don't want to clean that amount of space. Yeah, fair. I would rather have a smaller space that just like really feels like it's mine. Yeah. And I love living in community. So yeah, there's things that are like kind of drawing my attention, but still I have a lot of questions. For sure. And I think like for most citizens, it's going to be a lot to learn to kind of move through this process. But I think what you said really hits the nail on the head for me is like, you're willing to kind of live in a smaller space. You're interested in the investable opportunity. And there's this idea of like, can I actually help support the housing crisis? Like, can I create affordability? And maybe I don't have to give up on anything. And I think like, this is the thing most people are saying is like, well, we all know the inner city housing costs have gone up significantly and they continue to climb. Yeah. And so like who's to say that a townhome is not going to be $1 million in any given moment? And I think the thing that we're saying is like, well, I'm trying to help teach you folks like you, is that maybe we can still give you what you need and it's still going to be expensive, but that doesn't mean we can't create other senses of affordability. And so without this, you know, ability to have the zoning in place to deliver that, it's not even an option. Right. Yeah. And so, you know, I think obviously citywide rezoning is showing up here. I guess my question to you is like, what would it take to get young people engaged in these conversations? Because they're not there yet, right? Like most of the folks that are there are people who are rooted in the community that are struggling with the change that's happening with them. I think this voice is missing. And so what would you kind of tell me and maybe folks out there of like, why is it important to get involved and how do we get your interest and make you more interested in getting involved? Yeah, well, I was even talking to my wife about this the other day and she was like, because we were talking about, could this be us? Like, could this be us in the next 5 years? Could it be us in the next 10 years that we could take a lot and turn it into, like 5 or 8 units? And she's like, honestly, it sounds exciting to me, but it just feels impossible. Yeah. And so I think when we think about it that way, it's finances. It's
sure.
Like, how does it make sense that someone like us would have the funds to be able to create 8 places for people to live?
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing. And even when you were in our office and talking to people on our team, that's kind of, I think, the resistance you felt too, is like, there's no way that could be me.
For sure.
So I think that's step number 1, is just helping people understand, like, how does the math work? First of all, let alone what is the process once the math is in place.
Yeah.
But if the math works, then I think people can start to visualize themselves in that scenario.
Yeah.
And then the rest we're all willing to do the work. We're 100%. Willing to do this, take the steps. But
yeah. And I guess, so we'll wrap up here. For me, I think you're hitting on like the key points. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. For us to ask hard-earned Canadians to invest their money within this process, I think there's a balance of investing money while creating affordability. And so my ask, I'm hitting the pavement to say, let's let Canadians help solve the housing crisis, participate in a way to create affordable housing, but also delivering on their needs and being respectful of those community members that are there today. I remember when I lived at, the complex that you were at across the street, there was a woman who'd been there for 50 years and she was by herself and she was widowed. And I would go there, have conversations with her and just like, and you could tell that she was going to eventually have to age out of a place. Yeah. And now her house is for sale. I just saw that the other day. And
we've seen a few people move out just on that block.
Yeah. And for me, like the goal is like, how do we keep those people in place? I think Middle can do that. And so, this is dope, man. I really appreciate you joining me. And thank you all for watching and joining us here on the live, and looking forward to these weekly conversations. So stay tuned to the Middle.